I really love pattern, and I'm always on the lookout for new patterns that I can use in my work. I even have an Instagram account specifically dedicated to patterns that I find. Some of the most common places I find pattern are in nature, specifically birds and fish. I also like to look at textiles quite a bit. At Michael's, how they have those boxes with the really cheesy patterns on them, or the scrapbooking stuff. I actually love scrapbooking materials because they have just these really bright, simple patterns that I can easily take from later. Recently, I had a similar experience where I was eating at one of my favorite restaurants in the whole world. And whenever I go to this restaurant, I always have to get the BBQ Squid. One, it's beautiful. It's red and purple and brown and crispy, and it's got this really, really gorgeous speckled pattern on it. Besides tasting delicious, has this great texture, like all the little tentacles. It's kind of like broccoli. And I thought, wouldn't it be a great thing to have a painting that represents this experience, because it's involving like all of the senses. Now I'm going to do thumbnails, and with my thumbnails, usually I use markers because they're kind of a great in-between between drawing and painting. Some of my markers have super thick tips like this, which means I can use them more broadly. I start by putting in big shapes, and then I go into detail afterwards with my smaller markers. I don't draw out the square first. I kind of make my drawing as this expanding doodle, and then I can frame it from there however I want. Right now I'm looking at a photo, but I'm not looking at it very hard. One really nice thing about patterns is that, and textures, is that they repeat themselves. So I just kind of, when I'm looking at a photo, I just kind of get the gist of what the pattern's like and then make it up. You could see the photo right now. It doesn't really look like what I'm doing, and that's going to be okay. I think if I look at the reference photo too much, I end up wanting it to look exactly like what the reference photo is, and that's like kind of boring to me, especially if it's not my own photo. Then it's just like, why is this here? So I'm looking at the reference photo to pick out the things that I really like, that I'm paying attention to. So for instance, for me with the BBQ Squid, I want that crunchiness. I'm looking at the little suction cups, and I'm looking at the color palette. Actually, a lot of the time I modify colors as well, because when you get a reference photo, especially that's not yours, you're not in control of what the colors are, and they can be like really dull and gross, or the lighting's not quite right. And as an artist, you have the opportunity to change all of that in the ways that you want. I'm not very good at drawing things hyper-realistically. Like, my brain kind of overloads, like drawing like every leaf on a tree, for instance, would drive me insane. Like, I'll draw like 3 leaves and I'm like, screw it, I'm done. Right now I'm drawing all these cats for people. I'm doing these cat commissions. They give me like any random photo that they've taken of their phone at like some like weird angle, or like the lighting's bad or something. I take things in the image that I want to accentuate, and sometimes I add things that are not even there. And I recently did this one person's 2 cats on a couch, and the couch is just like white. It actually like blends in with another one of the cats, and it's totally not very interesting. And I just put this crazy orange flower pattern on it, and I'm like, oh, well, I hope she likes this, because this sets off the cats a little better for me. Luckily, it was good. It was fine. She was okay with it. But like, I think I get bored really quickly, and that's why I'm not good at drawing hyper-realistically. Copic markers are actually the cheaper option over time. And that's because you can get these refills. And this is full of ink, and when your marker dies, like this current one has, you can just take off the top, and see it has this little nozzle. It says to do like 10 or 12 drops, but I end up usually putting in more. So it's kind of going into this there's a little sliver here that's open, and it goes into the inkwell. Sometimes when you're working in abstract, it becomes a good idea to flip your canvas or your sketchbook one way or the other, because it just looks better that way, and that's the way it wants to go. And that's what just happened to me. what I had originally drawn vertically wants to be horizontal. Since I'm an acrylic painter, I have to mix all my colors ahead of time. I can't just mix them on the canvas because then they dry out and you don't get a consistent color and things just don't go the right way. I mix all of my paints in these little plastic cups, and that helps me save colors for later. I have little lids for them because when I mix stuff on a palette, it actually wastes paint because it just dries out on the palette. But if I put it in a cup, I can save it for another painting session, and I can spray a little water on it. I have this spray bottle, and that keeps it moist, and so it won't dry out in the cup. Before mixing any of the mediums into my paints, and I'll be using a lot of mediums for this tutorial, I want my general colors figured out, and then I can alter the consistency of them. So I'm going to start with that. This is one of my favorite mixers, Cadmium Red, and this is real Cadmium Red, not Cadmium Red Hue. And you never want to get Cadmium Red Hue because it's full of filler and it looks really horrible when you mix it and the color is dull, and you just always want to get the real stuff. It's more expensive to get the real stuff, but it's definitely worth it. Make sure you know about some of the safety notes about it. You don't want to sand it down when it's dry because breathing it in, it's got metal in it, and that's bad. You don't want to really get it on your skin because, again, the heavy metals in it, not good for skin. Some of the same things that apply to Cadmium Red apply to Cadmium Yellow. It's actually made out of the same metal, just heated up to a different temperature, which I think is really cool. You can get any color between yellow and red. So there's Cad Orange, and I think there's even like a Cad Green. Ultramarine Blue is kind of transparent. One thing that I love about golden acrylics is that they have this little bar here that they have a little paint swash over, and you can tell what the paint actually looks like. So you can tell here that it's a little bit transparent. Since I don't have a ton of money, I can just go to Home Depot and look at all of their Oops paints. The Oops paint that they have is just like paint that they mix that's not the correct thing, or someone returned it. It's not the right color. So they sell it for super, super cheap. Like you can get a big gallon of paint for, I think it's like $9, and these little things are only 50 cents. So I just stock up on a ton of these like 50-cent containers. This is another one of my favorite colors that I love to use for mixing, and just in general, I think it's a beautiful color. This is yellow oxide, or also it's like, I think this counts as yellow ochre. It's a really natural browny yellow. I really highly recommend this color. It's like pretty opaque when you lay it down, but you can also make beautiful washes with it. It's like an all-purpose kind of color. I really recommend getting the golden titanium white. If you got a store brand white, you can get a lot of it for pretty cheap, but it's not, you're gonna have to put down a few layers to get like a really nice white, especially if you're going over a dark surface. Golden white is like super, super heavy duty. Like you put one layer of this down and it's like super opaque. I have a couple staple tools that I use for all of my paintings. The first one having to do with mixing is this is my mixing palette knife. I really like it because I like this width a lot. And it doesn't taper off too much. If you have a palette knife that you're mixing with that's too skinny at the top, you like don't get a very consistent mixing ability. So it's kind of like almost a butter knife. So I use it like that. But I really like that it's flat. It's like very straightforward. But this is not very good for actually laying paint on the canvas because it's flat. So I also have an offset palette knife, and this makes it so that, you know, I don't get paint that you know, gets all the way to the handle there. Like the handle, if I use this to paint on the canvas, the handle gets all stuck in the paint. It makes a mess. So this is very helpful to have it where the palette knife is not like right next to the handle. I get these super cheap kind of generic brushes at Michael's, and I really, really like them because they're not very fancy or anything. They're like the lowest grade of brush, but it really doesn't matter to me. So I get these packs of like 1 inch, 2 inch, and 3 inch brushes, and it comes in like one pack and it costs like $5. And these last me like a long time, and if they break down, it doesn't matter. So I use this one often for priming on a small canvas, like putting down one big all over layer. And I use it as a more detailed brush on larger canvases. This is probably my favorite brush of all time, and I probably use it too often. I use this flat brush. And I love it because it's just small enough to get into the nitty-gritty, and it's also super exact because it's got a straight across. I have various other flat type brushes, again, because I'm a super clean exact painter, and this gives me the most easily controlled line. I don't have a lot of money for fancy mediums. A kind of hack that I use is old coffee grounds. So I've saved this from, well, I don't really drink that much coffee anymore, but when I did drink 5 cups a day, I saved all my grounds and put them in here. And this is a great way to build up the body of your paint without spending like any money at all. It looks as if you're using like pumice in your paint. You can't really use it as well with light colors like white or yellow because it will tint it a little bit brown. But I found it really useful overall, especially for the darker colors. And you can even use that color, the brown color, to your advantage if you're mixing neutrals. I like to have my palette pretty much all figured out before I go into the actual painting. I eyeball all of my color mixing until I feel like it's right. There's no kind of formula that I have. This is clear granular gel. This acts a little bit similar to the coffee grounds in that it's going to be really like bumpy and textural. But what I like about these is that they dry clear and it looks kind of like eggs, like fish eggs or something. I have gloss super heavy gel, and this really beefs up the body of the paint. It gets really, really thick and it will dry in mounds. This is kind of my ace because I'm a very detailed painter. This is a liner brush. And what's great about these is you get it wet first and it goes into this nice, really, really sharp tip. So you can get the tiniest details ever with this. The other thing that I love about it is that you don't have to hold it very tightly to get good control. In fact, it's better to hold it kind of loosely in your hand, and that will give you a better, more consistent line quality. So it's actually better for my hands because I tend to get really tight. This is kind of like the sprinkles on my painting. It's going to be one of the last steps I do. They're just really kind of foo-foo. They come in a whole bunch of metallic colors. So it's just like being mindful of like when and how you use them. What started out as a fun experience in a restaurant eating BBQ squid ended up in this really cool kind of textural playground for a painting. I think it's important to realize when you're painting that it's okay to let things go and kind of let the painting guide you instead of you dictate what the painting is. From this, I've realized what I really was interested in is the little suction cup bits. That's been my favorite part, and that's probably the thing that I'll take and put in my other paintings. I think this was a really fun exploration, and I hope you had as much fun watching as I did making it. I'm
gonna do B-roll of you doing that.
This is a nice color. The hue to